Welcome everybody to the Kim Barrett Show. I am your host, Kim Barrett, and on today's episode we have the CEO of Maropost, Mr. Ross Paquette. Now, Ross is an absolute legend when it comes to accelerating and growing businesses. He 11x the company in less than 24 months, took them from around doing $3 million a year to well over $30 million a year, and they're now a $100 million a year company. And I just wanted to find out, how do you go about that? What does that look like? Running two offices in two different cultures. If you've been someone who's wanted to grow fast, this is the episode that you need to listen into, you need to tune into. And of course, if you ever need help with marketing to help you grow fast, you can just head over to www.mogulcall.com. But until then, let's jump into the show with Ross. Ross, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Now, I always like to kick off the podcast with the same question every single time, which is, if I met you at a party and we were having a drink together and we were chatting away, and I said to you, Ross, what is it that you actually do? What's your go-to answer?
So I start off, again, given the SaaS space, which I do reside in, by just simply saying I'm in the tech space. So I run a company called Maropost. Maropost develops products, again, in the SaaS atmosphere, so software as a service, mainly across marketing automation, e-commerce, and transactional messaging. So what that means is our marketing automation tools would be, things like customer journeys, workflows, lifecycle automation, email, push, in-app messaging, SMS in terms of delivery. So essentially the core, somewhat of the backbone of any marketing team, regardless of whether you're in the B2B or B2C space. Well, of course, our market though is mainly selling to companies who are selling to the B2C space. And then we've recently jumped into the more transactional atmosphere. So for any of your tech savvy listeners, very similar to what a SendGrid or a Twilio or a SparkPost might do. That was natural for us, given the backbone of our original platform being on the marketing automation side, was email, SMS, and so on and so forth. And then our newest product that we've launched, which is obviously very compelling in today's market as well, is we've launched our own e-commerce product. So much like a Shopify Plus, centered more though for the mid-market to enterprise. So covering everything from storefronts to order forms to subscription billing to advanced reporting and dashboarding and so on and so forth as well.
And you guys have seen some pretty crazy growth. And I know the guys sent over before we jumped onto this, some of the results. And I think one of it was almost 11 times growth. I think it was was it a year?
Yeah, in a year. Yeah. So over the course of probably 28 months, we went from around 300,000 in revenue to 20 million or 22 million in revenue. So pretty significant jumps in a really short amount of time.
And what was it that drove that? And what was the difference? How long did it take you to get to 300K? And then from 300K for that kind of astronomical rise, what was the difference there?
Yeah, it wasn't much. So the zero, it was kind of an interesting background. I'll try to keep it brief, but Maropost is completely bootstrapped. So we didn't have any investors. I was working at another tech company, coincidentally, in sales. And essentially what ended up happening is started up the company. It was probably about 2 or 3 years of sort of that 0 to 300,000, because again, I was working as well and just getting the product in the right state. Of course, you run into a number of different, issues, whether that be your partner in that endeavor, which I ran into, and then subsequently found another one. But once we got to that 300 and I realized, okay, I'll leave my current role and the product has reached a state where we can really sign up anyone, that became really a differentiating factor. And so it was only 28 months from the 300 point to the 22 million point. So again, extremely fast from there. And then of course our growth has been pretty consistent since then.
So what was the fuel on the fire? Obviously you figured out that it's going to be suitable. You can onboard pretty much anyone that you want to. You've got it all obviously working effectively. What were some of the 2 or 3 biggest factors that contributed to that exponential growth? Because I think a lot of people, they're like, I got to 300K and then I didn't go to 20 million in the next 24 months, What were some of the factors there?
Yeah, so we were only, and funny thing I should add, disclaimer, is that when we were at the 20 million or so, we only had about 25 people in the company. And when we're even at the, as you saw at the sort of 3.3 to even 13 million, we only had about 10 people in the company. So it's still extremely small. And I say that on the premise of the next statement I'll make, which is around your question. We really just focused on the customers and the product, customer support. Like I was the customer support agent as well as the sales rep and the, CEO and so on and so forth. So, we followed, I would say, just that same approach where the customers were the most important factor. The product development and innovation became the key area. And I think we were fortunate enough that as we continued to bring on new customers, they, of course, shared our story and sort of our background and of course our product with their counterparts within the industry, and it was just very exponential from there. So the bulk of our customer base, even till this day, about 40 to 50%, I'd say now, comes from word of mouth. So as in, it's not from conferences or ad campaigns or any of our other more traditional strategies. And so that's been really unique. And again, because we are more mid-market to enterprise centric, our product is quite expensive. So our customer is paying on average around 75,000 per year for the service. Of course, we have very small customers, but we also have very large ones as well.
So, was there any incentivization programs? Did you guys go into it thinking like we're going to focus on word of mouth, or how did you build that out?
That's what I mean. Yeah. So we didn't do anything. There was no expectation. There was definitely no strategy. People were just doing it on their own. So we've never had any kind of affiliate programs or referral programs. Not to say we haven't looked or thought about doing that, but nothing on that front. It's interesting as we are looking to sort of expand our sales model to not only be direct sales, which is what we are today, into more of the self-service market. It's interesting to hear some of the stories around what companies are paying from a referral or lead gen perspective, and explains a lot, I think, around the SaaS space in general these days, why companies in a lot of cases need so much capital to grow, because the cost per customer acquisition costs are just so high.
So, what was the difference between your software and others on the market? Because obviously, for people to talk about it that much at that time, there had to be some pretty big standout things. Because otherwise, it's like I use lots of software, and if people ask me, I'm like, yeah, I use this, but I'm not necessarily.
I'm not going to put my name behind it.
Yeah, going as hard as that, and that growth obviously attributes to it. So, what do you think was some of the key differences at that time?
Yeah. So product wise, I mean, we built a lot of technology very quickly. On the specific side of things, like our A/B multivariate testing was extremely robust. Segmentation, our journey kind of automation builder was really advanced. Some of our reporting, it was really, there's nothing in particular. Like there's no three or four features actually that I could think of that really moved the needle. I think it was just that the industry was moving forward, and we were I wouldn't even say we were at pace. We were definitely ahead of where the industry was going. So there was a lot of excitement being driven around that side, right? It's quite similar to what you see every 6 to 12 months around. Okay, now we're talking about AI, and now we're talking about relational tables, and now we're talking about machine learning, and so on and so forth. And there's always that kind of interest in those areas, and because we kept, I think, hitting those chords, and sorry, in a usable manner is the other thing. I mean, I could use AI as the example where people hear AI and like, oh, we need to buy that. And then nobody ever implements anything related to whatever they saw, because it doesn't frankly quite exist. But what we were building, we actually existed, actually could implement, and actually drove results for our customers. And that was the most important factor.
And how did you find it personally? Obviously, you had a background before in tech and were in a company, but then managing and being the CEO of a company that's doing 300K versus 20 million, I would have to anticipate you've got new problems popping up that you have to deal with. How did you manage that?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, we have an interesting story, especially over the last number of years. So on the people side of things, I've always had, say, a unique view, whether it be culture or just my outlook or expectation around our team. And it's always been driven around work ethic, because as a company, we started just with an extremely strong work ethic. As I mentioned, we had to do all of the work ourselves. And what I said before, Ross was the support rep. Like he was handling the tickets, not just Ross, but the various others. My partner, Jag, he would have to get on calls with customers and go through, kind of tech support tickets and issues and so on. I think because of that, we really have this appreciation towards that side of things. So of course it's adapted over the last, 9 years, but our view really resides on if we find, sort of birds of a feather type individuals, we really resonate well with them and can really manage and lead them well. Unfortunately, that's not the entire workforce. And unfortunately, not everybody you hire or everybody you even want to retain in your company follows along with that specific view. So adapting to that side has been, hasn't been the hardest, but certainly hasn't been the easiest. There's been a lot of, mistakes or errors made around, hiring and around individuals and their backgrounds and how those are really going to work at Maropost specifically. I think, as I talk to my counterparts, it's really the same for everyone. And that's why it's interesting to see how, especially today and in this, post COVID world, what things are going to look like from a hiring perspective and how important it's going to be to not hire 25 people because we all think it's a good idea, but to hire 5 really great people. And I have a bit of a philosophy as well that relates back to that statement, which is more of the slow and steady wins the race approach, right? Which has not become the common theme in the, Silicon Valley technology space, right? It's always, how do we get to $1 billion or how do we sell the company or how do we go public as fast as humanly possible? And because that hasn't been our approach, right, we've been able to learn from our mistakes very quickly and hopefully iterate and make good decisions from there.
For small and medium business owners that are listening to this and they're hearing you talk about the pitfalls of hiring and whatnot, what are some of the big mistakes that you found out about early on that now you've kind of been able to patch over and go, cool, we won't do that again? Like, what are some of the ones that really stuck with you?
Yeah, so I'd go with probably two or three areas here in particular. So number one, I think that in any business, right, you of course look for people who have been successful in a similar role elsewhere. And I think it's a misconception, not in that you shouldn't be doing it, but it's a misconception in that what made somebody successful at one company may not make them successful at your company or my company in any event. And so really paying attention to the atmosphere that they're coming from and how that aligns with your potential atmosphere, I think is a very important discussion or internal conversation for any, CEO, executive, manager to think of. Because, I'll give you an example, and I don't want to be too specific because it relates to somebody at Maropost, but we hired somebody, Fortune 500 company, thinking like this, person was phenomenal. And again, great resume, great track record at that company. But Maropost is not a Fortune 500 company. And so the atmosphere that they again moved into, while still great, was just frankly not the same. And there was a lot of friction and a lot of stress that came along with that, because it's not just because the role was different or because even the company was different. It's all the other little things. The marketing strategy was different. The culture is different. The management structure is different. The systems, processes, and approach are different. And so, yeah, again, anybody in the SMB or mid-sized business arena today, I think we sort of see that and we're like, oh, maybe that a gentleman or woman will be able to do that here. And so we doubled down on that approach. And unfortunately, Maropost has had, 2 pretty impactful scenarios like that where it really hurt and it really set us back by, a good 12 to 18 months in terms of that. Because any executive you hire, any manager you hire has that long tail on their, approach, because then they go and they hire people. And then when you start to unravel all of that, it's just a bit of a mess that I think people don't realize they're signing up for. So being very careful on that side of things is critical. The other area that I think is extremely important when it comes to this, and especially again, as we expand and we look at these, the hiring practices or the profiles that we're hopefully all going to be much more specific on as we move forward after the current state of the world, is having a good system in place. So for a long time, I don't even know what we used, frankly. It feels like we maybe used email and Excel and a number of things. I mean, this is back a number of years, but the great thing with the technology space these days, not being Maropost, but just in general, is that there's so many amazing systems out there for managing people and hiring. And and in my belief, holding people accountable, to their metrics and so on is quite difficult. Just tracking it is quite difficult. So having a good system in place, that's cost effective, of course, as well, I think is a really strong move. So as an example, and I'm not saying this as an advocate for their product, but I think it's great. We use Bamboo HR. It's $5 per employee per month. I mean, that is extremely low cost, in my opinion, compared to the information that we're able to track and gather and store within that application. So those small kind of little investments here and there, I think, are really helpful. And again, just being more tool centric than being more labor centric, as in, instead of having somebody try to keep this all organized in a Google Drive file, they can just go into Bamboo HR, plug in the individual, automatically manages all of their employment agreements and changes and contracts and performance reviews and ENPS scores. I mean, it's very helpful. So I'd say those would be two of the core areas that I highly recommend, especially for anybody in just that early stage of wanting to keep things, clean and organized so you can focus on the business.
I'm going to have to check that out, Bamboo H. My general manager listens to all these podcasts, so Christy, check that out. Forgive me, I'm not sure on this. So with your company then and your organization, are you obviously at the moment different? Are you generally remote? Are you all in one big office? What's the setup and atmosphere you run with normally?
Yeah. So we actually have two offices. They're split about 60-40 in terms of people, 60-40% that is. So we have an office in Toronto, of course, are actually both locations are sort of our HQ. And then we have an office in Chandigarh or Mohali, India as well. And so my CTO partner is from there. And of course, that was actually our first office. It has long been our largest team, not on purpose, just sheer growth and capacity and sort of the examples, as I mentioned, around the product side of things. Of course, we have a strong development team, and we do have development in Canada as well. And most of the teams have representation on both sides, with the exception of sales, I believe, is the only one, now that I can think about it. So we've got people in both locations, and they all work, in relative unison.
And the atmosphere, you mentioned the atmosphere and the culture. Is it pretty much synonymous where it's like you work into Toronto or you're walking in India and it's like the same sort of vibe, or what's the feel like?
Yeah, with the exception of the cultural differences, it's pretty much the same. I mean, we look to mimic the style of both offices, the philosophies or views or values of the individuals in both offices. That actually is a key point, I suppose you could say, over the last 24 months in particular, is making everyone feel like, like we're all one company, same team. It is all Maropost, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, sometimes the Indian team feels like they're a bit of the outsiders, and there's not this cross communication. So we've really done a great job of ensuring that's brought together, as in, of course, now we're all, working remotely, but making sure that there's always video if we're doing, meetings on both sides. So there's that personal touch and stronger kind of communication aspect of it all.
So I got to ask, because obviously everyone's thinking technology company software. Do you just have, sleep pods and bean bags and ping pong tables everywhere, or what's the office setup like?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. The team laughs at me because I always use the beanbag chair approach when I talk about sort of the perks of what has sort of been strenuous on the tech space. But to answer your question, no, we don't have any of that. I mean, we do have nice offices, but, we have lunches brought in once a week. I would say that's like our best, kind of perk outside of the general benefits and so on that we have. We do a fair amount. I mean, we have had, some massage, but we don't have that kind of, Google-esque setup in the office space. No, we're more assembly lined approach, I suppose you could say, in a good way.
Yeah, and so with that, what are some of the things that you've instilled then within the culture? Obviously, you mentioned there's the work ethic and things like that. Obviously, especially with technology and computer-based focus stuff, and with people realizing that it's obviously can be high stress, not only on the brain, the eyes, the body as well, all that sort of stuff. With the culture that you've built there and the atmosphere that you've built up, what are there any kind of key takeaways that you can again share for some of the the guys that are in the growth phases that they could look to adopt and bring in early on to save them in the long run?
Yeah, so great question. Sort of two answers to that. In that, on one hand, I do believe that right now, like today, and for the coming certainly at least weeks, potentially with people working from home, they are actually overworking themselves. So some of those things that you're talking about are actually the most important right now. Maybe not 4 months ago, they were not as important, but it is key. And I don't necessarily know that we've done anything different, but we have really paid attention to that, as in at the executive level. Like, we've had conversations around, like, do we want to just, much actually like a couple other companies, Google's done this as well, but do we want to give people a couple extra days off, even though we know they're probably going to do work on those days because they're in their homes or apartments and really frankly can't do much else. So that's been something that's sort of floated, and we've been paying more attention to that. But when we go back to, just what we would do normally and what we will do in normal course and what would be recommended, there's one actually company that we work with as well. Again, ironically, it's another app or tech solution. What they've done is they've integrated the benefits side of things with, kind of the health and wellness aspect. And the company's called League, and coincidentally, they're out of Toronto, Canada, but I think most of their business is done in the US. And the first time I saw this product, again, I'm rarely blown away by products. I mean, even with using the Bamboo HR example, I knew what we were seeing there. What blew me away there was just the cost of it, that it was so reasonable. But with this product, what they do, so you have your benefits, right? I mean, I don't know about Australia, but in Canada, I never in my entire career have submitted a receipt or for prescription or for a massage or for a doctor's appointment, for what have you. I've never done it. It's not because I haven't done those things. It's because of just the aggravation of going through the process has been a nightmare. And so I use this as an example, because what they have inside of this app is really everything. So you can, a mental health professional, you can speak to a doctor, nurse, you can speak to a chiropractor. I think there was something recently around dermatologist. You can do all of this through this app that's provided to you and connected to your benefits program, so that everything you do within there requires no, submitting forms and receipts and emails to the HR team or the finance team. I felt that was a huge turning point for us. And I don't know, what their structure is for smaller businesses in particular. I mean, we're not large, we're only 150 people. I'm not saying that's small, but at the same time, I don't know what programs they would have for that. But that was a really great point for us to make a small investment as we saw it, but create a huge impact to the day-to-day living, that people go through, right? As in, if I can't speak for anybody else but myself, but the situations I've heard from our employees over the years, if they're dealing with something, sometimes they don't have the time because they're in the office to actually go and speak to somebody about maybe issues they're going through, or about, health and wellness issues that they're having. And I think that just trying to make that easier makes it easier, both of course on the team, but also on the company itself. So that was a really important factor. So I would encourage, again, and no promotion for the company, but I truly believe in that product or where that is going. And so I would encourage people to look and see if they can use that service at their business, because again, similar to Bamboo HR, the cost base was the same. And again, when you think about how much companies spend on benefits, large or small, especially in thinking of the US, I think Australia is a little more like Canada, but it's insane amounts of money. And so that I think that would be an important factor to explore.
That's awesome. I love that. And can you just say the name of it again, just because I missed it?
It's literally League. So like
League.
hockey league or league, soccer league.
Yeah.
League.com, I believe it is, actually.
And now I always like to kind of, as we wrap up our time here together, ask one question the same to everyone. What's one question that I didn't ask you that I should have?
There's probably a number of them. I mean, sure, we could carry on here for a couple hours, but it really depends. I'm not trying to put the question back on you, but it depends on what you feel is most important to your listeners.
No one's ever flipped the question back on me before.
Yeah, sorry. I would ask you that because I think your listeners, are people that you're familiar with and have your connection with. So what do you feel would be, really helpful for them? I mean, I can certainly talk about how important, profitability is, or how important, culture is, both at the, on the ownership, founder, however we want to call it, level, and for the team themselves. We can, talk about innovation. I mean, there's a number of areas that I would typically go to, but I feel that you might have a good sense for what people really might value it, maybe within those areas.
I love that. I love that. Flipping it back to me that's great. So,
Sorry.
no, it's good. I love it. So, for example, the service-based business owners are a lot of who we have tune in, whether they're similar to us and they might run agencies and agency work, or they work with people and they provide education, information, and things like that. Obviously, being that you're in SaaS and tech, slightly different, but how would you apply innovation to those types of businesses, especially with the world being as it is at the moment? Is there anything that you can kind of observe at the high level and the fields that you play in that might be applicable to people in service-based industries as well?
Yeah. So service based is difficult and always interesting to me. I mean, so we have a very literally insignificant portion of our company is service based. And the reason for that, I mean, is of course we are in the SaaS space, and while we can provide services for many things, we really choose not to. And I'm not telling anybody not, to shut down your business and move on. But the basis for that statement is that, much like my views that you've probably seen online, and I'm sure some have shared before our chat, that I'm a big believer in the profitability side of things. And so I mentioned that as it pertains to the service side of things, and that you really have to be even stronger in terms of your views and opinions around profit when you're running a service business. Because as you just mentioned, what we're seeing right now, detrimental is a total understatement as to what this situation is going to be towards service business. And so the more prepared, I think this statement is obvious, but more prepared anyone could be or could have been before COVID, to maintain and work through and avoid sort of the struggles as part of what's happening over, let's call it the last, 2.5 months or upwards of 3 months now. I hope this is a strong learning lesson for those individuals who work their way out of it, in that, it, again, going back to one of my earlier points, it doesn't always have to be, we have to build it up to sell, or we have to grow by all costs. Like, there is a value in terms of the profitability of a business. And if I frankly were running a service business, I would be looking for, 30 to 50% profit at a minimum, because things change all the time, right? There's no shortage of agencies or again, service organizations across any vertical going out of business. And I think that's really something that again, it has sort of been ignored as part of the culture that we've, again, thinking of SaaS or tech, or even again, MarTech agencies and so on and so forth, have gotten into, where it just becomes this more of like, let's spend everything we make to hopefully grow and hopefully get acquired, or hopefully raise capital from, parties XYZ. I don't believe in that philosophy. I've never believed in that philosophy. I'm not saying there aren't situations where it absolutely makes sense to follow those paths, but in my experience, I would say a good 90% plus shouldn't be following that methodology. And unfortunately, again, I am part of the industry or the vertical that I think has had the most kind of toxicity around that, and you're seeing a lot of pushback in terms of that as well in the tech community. And I would like to see, again, more businesses, just like, I love hearing about companies that are like been around for 15 years, profitable, still growing. Growth is always, I think, a mandatory metric. I don't believe in the grow to a certain state and then fully cut, kind of stop and milk the profits out of the business. But I think there's a happy medium that can happen there. So bringing it back to just kind of my answer, it's how important profitability is to a business, certainly a service-based one, and to prioritize that, in a meaningful way. And whether that's finding inefficiencies and of course covering those by using more technologies. I obviously am a big advocate for the tech space, but I think that's just so important. And it's something that, I've done for most of my time at Maropost, and I will continue certainly to do that moving forward as well.
Amazing. Great takeaway for everyone there. Now, if everyone's been listening and they've been going, look, this guy sounds really cool, I want to find out more about Maropost, more about yourself as well, where's the best place for them to go online and connect?
For sure. So there's a couple different areas here, so I'll try to keep this short. But obviously for the company, maropost.com, so maropost.com as the core area there. For myself personally, I'm not super big on social media in terms of just my general content, but I tend to share most about my life through Instagram. So it's just at Ross Andrew. Twitter is where you'll find me advocating the betterment of the world and the tech space, and more or less every possible conversation not in a day-to-day approach by anything. Same thing, it's at Ross Andrew there as well. I'd say those would be the best resources if you're looking to find out more. And of course, happy to speak to anybody if they ever want additional insight. My email is certainly not a secret. It's just ross@maropost.com.
There we go, guys. So wherever you're watching or listening to this, look around this and we'll have all those links in the show notes so you can click through and easily connect with Ross and find out more about Maropost as well. Ross, thank you so much for making the time to call in and join us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, same to you. I appreciate you having me as well.
Thank you very much.